What happens when a 7-year-old princess develops her own secret language with the most elite security force in the world? When Princess Charlotte of Wales first stepped into the public eye, royal watchers expected the usual waves, curtsies, and perfectly rehearsed smiles. But behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, something extraordinary was unfolding that would change royal protocol forever. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in March 2023, surveillance cameras captured something that left royal security scratching their heads. A small figure in a navy blue coat was seen making peculiar hand gestures toward the palace guard. Within seconds, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in over 200 years of royal tradition, a guard broke his stoic stance and responded. This wasn't a security breach. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was the beginning of a secret communication system that a young princess had created, one that would challenge centuries of rigid royal protocol and prove that sometimes the most powerful person in any room might just be the smallest one. What you're about to discover is the true story behind those mysterious signals, the dedicated guardsman who became an unlikely friend, and how a child's innocent curiosity created ripples that reached the very top of the British monarchy. This is the story that palace officials try to keep quiet, the story that shows how one little girl's determination to connect with the people protecting her family would ultimately reshape the way the royal household thinks about tradition, security, and human connection. Prepare to see the British royal family through completely different eyes. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana had always been different from her brothers. While Prince George carried himself with the quiet dignity expected of a future king, and Prince Louis charmed everyone with his mischievous energy, Charlotte possessed something unique, an insatiable curiosity about the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to keep her family safe. It began on a crisp autumn morning in 2022, when Charlotte was just 7 years old. The family had returned to Kensington Palace after a successful royal tour of Wales, and Charlotte found herself with an unusual amount of free time. Her governess, Miss Angela Thompson, had fallen ill with a terrible flu, leaving Charlotte's afternoon lessons canceled. Instead of retreating to her playroom filled with the finest toys money could buy, Charlotte did something that would set in motion a chain of events nobody could have predicted. She positioned herself at the tall windows of the palace's east wing, the ones that offered a perfect view of the guardhouse where the palace guard maintained their vigilant watch. From her perch on the velvet window seat, Charlotte could observe the guards as they went through their daily routines. She watched them march in perfect formation, their red uniforms pristine, their movements synchronized like a well-choreographed dance. What fascinated Charlotte most was their absolute stillness when on duty. These men stood like living statues, their eyes fixed straight ahead, seemingly unaware of the world around them. Yet Charlotte sensed something more beneath their stoic exteriors. She noticed how their eyes would occasionally shift when a bird landed nearby, or how their lips would twitch slightly when children playing in the palace gardens would laugh loudly. On this particular afternoon, as Charlotte pressed her small nose against the cold window glass, she witnessed something that sparked her imagination. A palace maintenance worker had dropped his toolbox near the guard post, tools scattering across the cobblestones with a tremendous clatter. While the guard remained perfectly motionless, Charlotte saw his eyes dart quickly toward the noise before returning to their forward position. In that brief moment, she realized these weren't emotionless soldiers at all. They were real people, forced to hide their humanity behind a mask of royal protocol. That evening, during dinner in the family's private dining room, Charlotte peppered her parents with questions about the guards. Prince William, still adjusting to his new role as the Prince of Wales, tried to explain the importance of tradition and protocol. He told Charlotte about the history of the palace guard, how they had protected British royalty for centuries, and why maintaining their discipline was crucial to their effectiveness. But Charlotte wasn't satisfied with history lessons. She wanted to know about the people themselves. Did they have families? Did they ever get tired of standing so still? Were they allowed to smile? Did they ever feel lonely? Catherine, the Princess of Wales, recognized the compassionate curiosity in her daughter's questions. It reminded her of her own childhood, when she would wonder about the stories behind every face she encountered. Rather than dismissing Charlotte's interest, Catherine encouraged it, suggesting that caring about others was one of the most important qualities a future royal could possess. That night, as Charlotte lay in her canopy bed surrounded by stuffed animals and fairy tale books, her mind raced with possibilities. She had learned about sign language in one of her educational programs, and she wondered if there might be a way to communicate with the guards without forcing them to break protocol. If they couldn't speak or move, Perhaps there was another way to let them know that someone cared about them as people, not just as uniformed protectors. The next morning, Charlotte woke with a sense of purpose that surprised even her nanny, Mrs. Sarah Mitchell. Instead of her usual reluctance to get dressed for the day, Charlotte practically bounced out of bed, eager to begin what she had decided to call her secret mission. She had spent most of the night thinking about simple gestures that might convey kindness and recognition without requiring a verbal response. After breakfast, while her brothers were occupied with their morning lessons, Charlotte returned to her observation post at the east wing window. The guard on duty that day was someone she hadn't seen before, a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair visible beneath his distinctive bearskin hat. Something about his gentle demeanor, even while maintaining perfect military posture, made Charlotte feel he might be receptive to her experiment. She started small. When the guard's patrol route brought him within view of her window, Charlotte simply raised her hand in a tiny wave. The guard's training prevented him from acknowledging her directly, but Charlotte was certain she saw the corners of his mouth twitch slightly upward. Encouraged by this microscopic response, she tried again the next time he passed by. This time, Charlotte added something new to her greeting. She placed her hand over her heart before waving, a gesture she hoped would convey that she saw him not just as a guard, but as a person worthy of recognition and respect. Again, while the guard maintained his professional demeanor, Charlotte noticed that his pace seemed slightly slower as he passed her window, as if he was savoring the brief moment of human connection. Word of Charlotte's daily window observations eventually reached the ears of her protection officers. Initially, there was concern that her routine might present a security risk, creating a predictable pattern that could potentially be exploited. However, after careful assessment, the security team determined that Charlotte's activities posed no threat. In fact, they noted that her presence seemed to boost morale among the guards, who took pride in knowing that the young princess found their service interesting and worthy of attention. As days turned into weeks, Charlotte's simple ways evolved into a more sophisticated form of communication. She began incorporating gestures she had learned from watching her mother interact with deaf members of the public during royal engagements. A thumbs up to indicate approval, two hands pressed together in a gesture of thanks, and a gentle pat over her heart to show appreciation. The guard who had become the primary recipient of Charlotte's signals was Sergeant James Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the Palace Guard whose own daughter was close to Charlotte's age. Morrison had initially been puzzled by the young princess's attention, but as her gestures became more elaborate and clearly intentional, he found himself looking forward to his assignments at the East Wing post. Morrison began to notice patterns in Charlotte's communications. On rainy days, she would motion toward the sky and then give him a sympathetic look, as if acknowledging that standing in the cold rain couldn't be comfortable. When she spotted him after he had been absent for several days, her wave would be more enthusiastic, accompanied by a bright smile that seemed to say she had missed seeing him. The breakthrough came on a particularly difficult day for Morrison. He had received news that morning that his own daughter was in the hospital with appendicitis, and, despite his professional training, he was struggling to maintain his usual composure. When Charlotte appeared at her window for their daily exchange, something in his expression must have conveyed his distress. Charlotte, with the remarkable intuition that children often possess, seemed to sense that something was wrong. Instead of her usual cheerful wave, she pressed both hands to the window and looked at him with genuine concern. Then, she did something that had never been part of their routine before. She formed her hands into the shape of a heart and held it against the glass, mouthing words that Morrison could clearly understand. "Are you okay?" For a moment that felt like an eternity, Morrison's professional facade cracked. The kindness of this small gesture from a 7-year-old princess, offered during one of the most difficult moments of his career, moved him profoundly. Without thinking, he did something that violated every rule of royal protocol he had spent 2 decades following. He nodded. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement, barely perceptible to anyone who wasn't watching closely. But Charlotte saw it, and her face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire palace courtyard. In that moment, a secret communication system was born, one that would challenge centuries of tradition and prove that human connection could flourish even within the most rigid protocols. That evening, Morrison reported the incident to his superior officer, fully expecting to face disciplinary action for his breach of protocol. Instead, he found himself in a conversation that would change everything about how the Palace Guard interacted with the royal family. The commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hartwell, was initially concerned about the implications of guards responding to royal family members outside of official protocols. However, after hearing the full story and understanding the innocent nature of Charlotte's gestures, Colonel Hartwell made a decision that surprised everyone involved. Rather than reprimanding Morrison or forbidding future interactions, she decided to study the situation more carefully. She recognized that Charlotte's interest in the guards represented something valuable, a bridge between the royal family and the people who dedicated their lives to protecting them. Colonel Hartwell arranged for a private meeting with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, to discuss Charlotte's activities. What she discovered during that conversation was that Charlotte's interest in the guards wasn't just casual curiosity. It was part of a deeper desire to understand and connect with everyone who played a role in her family's life. Catherine shared that Charlotte had been asking increasingly sophisticated questions about the guards' welfare. Did they get to eat regular meals during their long shifts? Were they allowed to see their families? What happened if they got sick while on duty? These weren't the questions of a privileged child taking servants for granted. They were the concerns of someone who genuinely cared about the well-being of others. As their conversation continued, both women realized they were witnessing something remarkable. Charlotte's natural empathy and curiosity were creating opportunities for meaningful human connection within an institution built on formal distance and protocol. Rather than seeing this as a problem to be solved, they began to view it as a gift to be nurtured. The decision was made to allow Charlotte's communications with the guards to continue, but with careful guidelines to ensure that security protocols remained intact. Morrison was designated as Charlotte's primary contact among the guards, and a simple system of hand signals was developed that would allow for basic communication without compromising anyone's safety or professional responsibilities. What nobody realized at the time was that this seemingly small decision would set in motion changes that would ripple through the entire royal household. Charlotte's secret signal system was about to become something much more significant than anyone could have imagined, a catalyst for examining how tradition and human compassion could coexist in one of the world's most formal institutions. As Charlotte drifted off to sleep that night, her last thought was of Sergeant Morrison's grateful nod and the warm feeling it had given her to know she had brightened someone's difficult day. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness was about to transform not just her own understanding of royal life, but the very foundations of how the palace guard viewed their service to the crown. 3 weeks after the first acknowledged communication between Princess Charlotte and Sergeant Morrison, something extraordinary was taking place in a secure conference room deep within Buckingham Palace. Colonel Patricia Hartwell sat across from Dr. Margaret Westfield, a child psychologist who specialized in royal family dynamics, and Captain Thomas Reed, the head of palace security. The topic of their meeting would have seemed impossible just months earlier: how to formalize a communication system between a 7-year-old princess and the palace guard. Dr. Westfield had spent considerable time observing Charlotte's interactions with Morrison and had reached some fascinating conclusions. She explained that Charlotte's natural ability to read facial expressions and body language was exceptionally advanced for her age, likely developed through years of attending public events where nonverbal communication was often more important than spoken words. The princess had essentially created her own diplomatic language, one that showed remarkable sensitivity to the constraints faced by the guards. The system that emerged from these meetings was more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. Morrison, working closely with Charlotte's governess and Dr. Westfield, developed a series of simple but meaningful signals that allowed for basic communication while maintaining the dignity and protocol required of the palace guard. The foundation of their secret language began with 5 basic signals. A slow blink from Morrison meant he was having a good day. 2 slow blinks indicated challenges, but nothing serious. A slight shift of weight from one foot to the other meant he was thinking of his family. When Charlotte placed her hand flat against the window, it meant she was asking how he was feeling. When she made a small circle with her finger on the glass, she was telling him to have a good day. What made these communications remarkable was their subtlety. To any casual observer, Morrison appeared to be maintaining perfect protocol, simply standing at attention as his duties required. Only Charlotte, watching carefully from her window perch, could detect the tiny variations that constituted their conversations. Similarly, Charlotte's gestures appeared to be nothing more than a child playing by a window, innocent movements that carried no obvious significance to anyone unfamiliar with the system. As winter melted into spring, their communication system grew more nuanced. Charlotte learned to read Morrison's mood with startling accuracy. She could tell when he was worried about something at home, when he was proud of his service, or when he was simply enjoying a beautiful day. Morrison, in turn, became attuned to Charlotte's emotional state. He could sense when she was excited about an upcoming royal engagement, when she was nervous about a new lesson, or when she was simply happy to see a friendly face. The breakthrough that elevated their communication from simple greetings to genuine conversation came during a particularly challenging period in Charlotte's education. She was struggling with advanced mathematics concepts that her tutors insisted were appropriate for someone of her intellectual abilities, but which Charlotte found frustrating and overwhelming. On this particular afternoon, Charlotte appeared at her window looking visibly upset. Her usual bright smile was replaced by a frown, and, instead of her customary enthusiastic wave, she simply pressed her forehead against the glass in a gesture of defeat. Morrison, recognizing immediately that something was wrong, did something unprecedented. He subtly adjusted his position so that he was directly facing her window, and then performed a series of movements that Charlotte had never seen before. First, he slowly rolled his shoulders back, a gesture that seemed to say stand tall. Then, he placed his hand briefly over his heart, indicating sincerity and care. Finally, he gave the slightest nod upward, a movement that conveyed encouragement and confidence. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds and would have been invisible to anyone not watching specifically for it. Charlotte understood immediately. Morrison was telling her that whatever was troubling her, she had the strength to overcome it. The encouragement from this trusted friend, delivered through their secret language, gave Charlotte the confidence boost she needed to return to her mathematics lesson with renewed determination. That evening, Charlotte surprised her tutors by not only completing her difficult equations but by asking for additional practice problems. When her governess commented on her sudden improvement, Charlotte simply smiled and said she had received some helpful advice from a friend. The success of Charlotte's mathematical breakthrough had unexpected consequences. Word of her academic improvement reached her parents, who were naturally curious about what had motivated such a dramatic change in their daughter's attitude toward challenging subjects. When Charlotte mentioned her friend's encouragement, Catherine began asking gentle questions about this mysterious friend. Charlotte's natural honesty made it impossible for her to keep the secret communication system hidden for long. Within a few days, she had told her mother everything about her daily exchanges with Morrison and how his encouragement had helped her feel more confident about difficult tasks. Rather than being concerned about this unauthorized friendship, Catherine was deeply moved by the story. Catherine recognized that Charlotte had stumbled upon something profound, a mentoring relationship that was providing emotional support and confidence building in ways that formal education couldn't achieve. The princess decided to discuss the situation with William, and together they made a decision that would surprise everyone involved in palace security. Instead of ending Charlotte's communications with Morrison, they wanted to expand them. William and Catherine had both experienced the isolation that could come with royal life, the way protocol and security requirements could create barriers between them and the people around them. They recognized that Charlotte's friendship with Morrison represented exactly the kind of genuine human connection that they wanted their children to experience, even within the constraints of royal life. A meeting was arranged between the royal couple and Morrison himself. The sergeant, who had served the royal family faithfully for 20 years, found himself in the surreal position of sitting in an elegant drawing room, discussing his friendship with a 7-year-old princess with her parents. Morrison was initially nervous about the meeting, concerned that he might have overstepped boundaries or compromised his professional position. Instead, he found William and Catherine genuinely interested in understanding how his communication with Charlotte worked and what impact it was having on both of them. Morrison explained that his interactions with Charlotte had reminded him why he had chosen to serve the royal family in the first place. It wasn't just about following orders or maintaining traditions. It was about protecting people he genuinely cared about. Seeing Charlotte's daily efforts to acknowledge and appreciate the guards had reinforced his sense of purpose and made him more committed than ever to his duties. For her part, Charlotte had gained something equally valuable. Through her friendship with Morrison, she was learning that leadership wasn't just about giving orders or receiving respect because of her title. True leadership meant caring about the people around her and finding ways to make their lives better, even in small ways. William and Catherine made a decision that would have shocked royal traditionalists, but delighted anyone who believed in the power of human connection. They formally approved Charlotte's communication system with Morrison and requested that similar opportunities be created for George and Louis to develop appropriate relationships with palace staff. The decision wasn't made lightly. Extensive security protocols were established to ensure that these communications could never be exploited or compromised. Background checks were expanded, rotations were carefully managed, and clear boundaries were established about what topics could and couldn't be discussed through the signal system. But within these carefully constructed parameters, something beautiful was allowed to flourish. Charlotte's daily conversations with Morrison became a highlight for both of them. She would share her excitement about upcoming events through elaborate gestures, and he would respond with encouraging signals that boosted her confidence. When Charlotte learned she would be giving her first solo speech at a children's charity event, her nervousness was visible to Morrison during their morning communication. He responded by standing a little straighter and giving her a series of confidence-building signals that became their version of a pep talk. The next day, when Charlotte delivered her speech flawlessly and with genuine enthusiasm, the first person she looked for when she returned to the palace was Morrison, eager to share her success through their secret language. The impact of their friendship extended beyond Charlotte herself. Other guards began to notice the positive effect that recognition and appreciation had on Morrison's performance and morale. Some quietly expressed interest in developing similar connections with other members of the royal household, leading to conversations about how the rigid protocols of palace service might be softened without compromising their effectiveness. Dr. Westfield continued to monitor Charlotte's development throughout this period and noted remarkable growth in her emotional intelligence and leadership abilities. The psychologist observed that Charlotte was learning crucial lessons about empathy, communication, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. These weren't lessons that could be taught through formal education. They were being learned through real relationships with real people who genuinely cared about her development. Perhaps most importantly, Charlotte was discovering that being royal didn't mean being separate from others. It meant finding ways to connect with people across different backgrounds and circumstances, understanding their perspectives, and using her position to make positive differences in their lives. As spring turned to summer, Charlotte's secret communication system with Morrison had evolved into something that resembled a true friendship, bounded by appropriate protocols, but genuine in its warmth and mutual respect. What had started as a child's curious experiment had become a model for how the royal family might maintain their dignity and security while still engaging meaningfully with the people who dedicated their lives to serving them. The success of Charlotte's relationship with Morrison was about to face its biggest test yet, as upcoming changes in guard rotations threatened to separate the unlikely friends. How they navigated this challenge would determine whether their secret language could survive the rigid requirements of palace protocol, or whether it would remain a beautiful but brief experiment in royal human relations. Unknown to Charlotte, Morrison, or even her parents, news of their unique friendship was beginning to circulate among palace insiders. Some viewed it as a heartwarming example of the royal family's humanity, while others worried it represented a dangerous precedent that could compromise security protocols. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test everyone's commitment to the secret language that had brought so much joy to a young princess, and the veteran guard who had become her unexpected mentor. As Charlotte prepared for bed that evening, carefully planning the next day's signals to Morrison, she had no idea that their friendship was about to become the subject of intense debate at the highest levels of palace administration. The secret language that had brought them together was about to face its greatest challenge, one that would determine not just the future of their communications, but the direction of royal protocol for generations to come. The crisis began on a Monday morning in late June, when Sir Edmund Blackwood, the newly appointed head of royal protocol, arrived at Buckingham Palace for his first official review of security procedures. Sir Edmund was a traditionalist in every sense of the word, a man who believed that the monarchy's strength came from its unwavering adherence to centuries-old customs and protocols. His reputation for rigidity had earned him both respect and fear throughout the royal household. Sir Edmund's first week involved comprehensive observations of daily operations, and it didn't take long for him to notice something that concerned him deeply. During his review of guard rotations and positioning, he witnessed what appeared to be unauthorized communications between palace guard personnel and members of the royal family. Specifically, he observed Sergeant Morrison engaging in subtle but deliberate gestures while Princess Charlotte performed what looked like coordinated responses from her window position. The discovery sent shockwaves through Sir Edmund's understanding of proper royal protocol. In his view, any unauthorized communication between security personnel and royal family members represented a potentially catastrophic breach of established procedures. He immediately launched a formal investigation, demanding detailed reports from Morrison, Colonel Hartwell, and anyone else who might have knowledge of these irregular interactions. Morrison found himself in the most difficult position of his 20-year career. Called into Sir Edmund's office on a Thursday afternoon, he faced a man whose stern expression and rigid posture conveyed complete disapproval of everything Morrison had been doing. Sir Edmund's questions were sharp and direct, designed to establish the exact nature and extent of what he had already deemed unauthorized fraternization with royal family members. The sergeant attempted to explain the innocent nature of his communications with Charlotte, emphasizing the approval he had received from Colonel Hartwell, and even from the Prince and Princess of Wales themselves. But Sir Edmund was unmoved by these explanations. In his view, previous approvals were irrelevant if they contradicted established protocol, and the fact that senior officials had permitted these communications only made the situation more serious. Sir Edmund's investigation revealed the full scope of Charlotte's secret communication system, including the psychological consultations with Dr. Westfield, the formal meetings between Morrison and Charlotte's parents, and the gradual expansion of signal protocols that had been developed over months of interaction. What others saw as a heartwarming example of human connection within royal service, Sir Edmund viewed as a systematic breakdown of essential security procedures. The protocol chief's report, delivered to palace administration on Friday afternoon, recommended immediate termination of all unauthorized communications between Charlotte and palace staff. Morrison was to be reassigned to duties that would eliminate any possibility of contact with royal family members, and new procedures were to be implemented to prevent similar situations from developing in the future. When news of Sir Edmund's recommendations reached Colonel Hartwell, she found herself facing the most challenging decision of her military career. She genuinely believed that Charlotte's communications with Morrison had been beneficial for everyone involved, improving morale among the guards while providing valuable lessons in leadership and empathy for the young princess. But she also recognized the legitimate security concerns that Sir Edmund's investigation had raised. The colonel requested a meeting with Sir Edmund to discuss potential compromises that might address his concerns while preserving the positive aspects of Charlotte's communication system. However, Sir Edmund was adamant that no middle ground existed. In his view, protocol was either maintained or it wasn't. There could be no selective application of rules based on good intentions or positive outcomes. Meanwhile, Charlotte remained completely unaware of the bureaucratic storm swirling around her friendship with Morrison. She continued her daily routine of morning communications, excitedly sharing details about her upcoming summer holiday through their established signal system. Morrison, knowing that each interaction might be their last, found himself memorizing every gesture and expression, trying to preserve these precious moments before the inevitable separation. The confrontation reached its peak when Sir Edmund scheduled a formal hearing to review the entire situation. Present at this meeting were Colonel Hartwell, Morrison, Dr. Westfield, and representatives from palace security. Notably absent were William and Catherine, who were attending official engagements in Scotland and remained unaware of the crisis developing around their daughter's friendship. Sir Edmund opened the hearing by reading a lengthy statement about the importance of maintaining strict boundaries between royal family members and palace staff. He cited historical precedents and security protocols, building a case that Charlotte's communications with Morrison represented exactly the kind of informal relationships that could be exploited by those with malicious intentions. Dr. Westfield attempted to counter Sir Edmund's arguments by presenting her psychological assessment of Charlotte's development during the period of her communications with Morrison. She provided detailed evidence showing improvements in the princess's confidence, empathy, and leadership skills, arguing that these benefits far outweighed any theoretical security risks. Morrison, when given the opportunity to speak, delivered what many present later described as one of the most moving testimonies they had ever heard. He spoke about the honor he felt in serving the royal family, not just as a guard following orders, but as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. He explained how Charlotte's recognition and friendship had renewed his sense of purpose and made him more committed than ever to protecting her family. The sergeant acknowledged Sir Edmund's security concerns, but argued that his relationship with Charlotte had actually enhanced security rather than compromising it. His emotional investment in her safety meant that he was more alert, more dedicated, and more willing to go beyond the basic requirements of his duties to ensure her protection. Colonel Hartwell supported Morrison's testimony by presenting data showing that guard performance and morale had improved measurably since Charlotte began her communication system. Absenteeism was down, performance evaluations were up, and several guards had voluntarily extended their service commitments, citing increased job satisfaction as a primary factor. But Sir Edmund remained unconvinced by these arguments. He maintained that good intentions and positive outcomes could not justify violations of established protocol. In his view, allowing personal relationships to develop between guards and royal family members set a dangerous precedent that could eventually lead to serious security compromises. The hearing concluded without resolution, with Sir Edmund promising to deliver his final recommendations within 48 hours. Morrison left the meeting knowing that his career as Charlotte's unofficial mentor was likely coming to an end, regardless of the benefits it had provided for both of them. That evening, as Charlotte performed her usual bedtime routine, she noticed that something seemed different about Morrison during their final communication of the day. His responses to her signals appeared subdued, and his usual encouraging gestures seemed forced rather than natural. The perceptive princess sensed that something was troubling her friend, though she had no understanding of the administrative battle being fought over their relationship. The next morning brought news that would change everything. William and Catherine returned early from Scotland after being briefed about Sir Edmund's investigation and recommendations. The Prince and Princess of Wales were shocked to learn that their daughter's friendship with Morrison was being characterized as a security threat and that officials were planning to terminate communications without consulting them. William's reaction was particularly strong. As someone who had grown up within the constraints of royal protocol, he understood the importance of security and tradition. But he also believed that his children should have opportunities to develop meaningful relationships with the people around them, even within appropriate boundaries. The idea that bureaucratic rigidity might eliminate one of Charlotte's most positive experiences infuriated him. Catherine was equally upset by Sir Edmund's approach. She had observed firsthand how Charlotte's friendship with Morrison had contributed to her daughter's emotional and social development. The princess had become more confident, more empathetic, and more aware of her responsibilities toward others. Ending this relationship without warning would be traumatic for Charlotte and would send the wrong message about the value of human connection. The royal couple immediately requested a meeting with Sir Edmund to discuss the situation. What followed was one of the most intense conversations ever held within palace walls, as traditional protocol administrators found themselves defending their positions against parents who were determined to protect their daughter's well-being. William made it clear that while he respected the need for security protocols, he would not allow bureaucratic concerns to override his judgment about what was best for his children. He pointed out that Charlotte's communications with Morrison had been carefully supervised and had never posed any actual security risk, only theoretical ones that existed primarily in Sir Edmund's imagination. Catherine added that the positive impact on Charlotte's development was undeniable and that eliminating this relationship would represent exactly the kind of rigid thinking that made royal life unnecessarily isolated and difficult. She argued that finding ways to maintain human connections within appropriate boundaries was essential for raising well-adjusted children who would eventually need to relate to people from all walks of life. Sir Edmund found himself in the uncomfortable position of arguing against the expressed wishes of the future king and queen. He maintained that his recommendations were based on established precedents and security best practices, but William and Catherine challenged him to provide specific examples of how Charlotte's communications had created actual risks rather than theoretical ones. The meeting lasted for over 3 hours, with both sides presenting passionate arguments for their positions. Sir Edmund's traditional approach emphasized the importance of maintaining clear boundaries and avoiding any precedents that might compromise security. William and Catherine's parental perspective focused on their daughter's well-being and their belief that positive relationships should be nurtured rather than eliminated based on abstract concerns. As the debate continued, it became clear that this confrontation was about much more than Charlotte's friendship with Morrison. It represented a fundamental clash between traditional royal protocol and a more modern approach that prioritized human connection and emotional well-being within appropriate security frameworks. The resolution of this conflict would determine not only the future of Charlotte's secret communication system, but also the direction of royal protocol for the next generation. Would rigid tradition prevail, Or would a new model emerge that balanced security concerns with the recognition that even princesses needed meaningful friendships to develop into well-rounded leaders? As evening approached, and the meeting finally concluded, all parties understood that the decision reached over the next few days would set precedents that would influence royal family life for years to come. Charlotte, still unaware of the battle being fought over her friendship, continued to plan her next day's signals to Morrison, not knowing that the future of their secret language hung in the balance. The solution came from an unexpected source. As debates raged between traditionalists and modernizers within the palace administration, Charlotte herself provided the breakthrough that would resolve the crisis in a way nobody had anticipated. On Wednesday morning, 3 days after the heated confrontation between her parents and Sir Edmund Blackwood, Charlotte noticed that Morrison was not at his usual post during their morning communication time. Instead, a different guard stood in his position, someone Charlotte had never seen before. When her usual greeting gestures received no response from the unfamiliar guard, Charlotte's confusion quickly turned to concern. By the afternoon, when Morrison still hadn't appeared, Charlotte's worry had escalated into something approaching panic. She sought out her mother, demanding to know where her friend had gone and whether he was sick or hurt. Catherine, who had been hoping to shield Charlotte from the administrative battle surrounding Morrison's reassignment, found herself struggling to provide explanations that a 7-year-old could understand. Charlotte's distress over Morrison's absence was more intense than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Westfield, who continued to monitor the princess's emotional development, noted signs of genuine grief and anxiety that went far beyond simple disappointment about a changed routine. Charlotte had lost appetite, was having difficulty sleeping, and had become withdrawn from activities she normally enjoyed. The princess's reaction forced everyone involved to confront the reality that they weren't just dealing with security protocols or administrative procedures. They were dealing with a child who had formed a meaningful emotional attachment to someone who had suddenly disappeared from her life without explanation. William and Catherine realized that regardless of how the official dispute was resolved, they needed to address Charlotte's immediate emotional needs. They arranged for Morrison to visit Charlotte privately, not for their usual communication routine, but for a proper conversation that would help her understand what was happening. The meeting took place in the family's private sitting room at Kensington Palace, with Catherine present to provide support for both Charlotte and Morrison. For the first time since their friendship began, they were able to speak directly to each other, without the constraints of their secret signal system. Morrison, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his guard uniform, seemed different to Charlotte, more like a regular person and less like the formal figure she had come to know through their window communications. But his warm smile and gentle manner were exactly the same, reassuring Charlotte that her friend was indeed the person she had thought he was. The conversation that followed was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Charlotte asked direct questions about why Morrison had disappeared and whether she had done something wrong. Morrison explained that their friendship had never been wrong, but that some people in the palace were concerned about guards and royal family members becoming too friendly with each other. Charlotte's response surprised everyone present. With the logical clarity that children often possess, she asked why anyone would think friendship was a bad thing. She pointed out that she had friends at school, friends among the palace staff, and friends in her family. Why would having a friend among the guards be different? Morrison found himself struggling to explain the complexities of royal protocol to someone whose worldview was refreshingly uncomplicated. How could he make Charlotte understand that adult concerns about security and tradition sometimes overrode common sense and basic human kindness? The breakthrough came when Charlotte offered her own solution to the problem. If people were worried about guards and princesses being friends, she suggested, perhaps they could create official rules about how such friendships should work. She proposed that there could be specific times for friendly communications, particular gestures that would be considered appropriate, and clear boundaries about what topics could and couldn't be discussed. Catherine was struck by the sophistication of Charlotte's proposal. Her 7-year-old daughter was essentially suggesting the formalization of what had developed naturally between her and Morrison, a structured approach that could address security concerns while preserving the human connection that both participants valued. Morrison was equally impressed by Charlotte's mature understanding of the situation. She wasn't demanding that adults change their rules to accommodate her wishes. Instead, she was proposing a compromise that could satisfy everyone's needs while maintaining the friendship that meant so much to both of them. The conversation concluded with Morrison explaining that important people in the palace were working to find a solution that would allow them to continue their friendship in some form. Charlotte made him promise that whatever happened, he wouldn't disappear again without saying goodbye. Morrison's emotional response to this request made it clear to Catherine that this relationship was as meaningful to him as it was to her daughter. That evening, Catherine shared the details of Charlotte and Morrison's conversation with William, focusing particularly on Charlotte's proposed solution to the protocol conflict. Both parents were struck by their daughter's instinctive understanding of compromise and her ability to think beyond her own immediate desires to consider the concerns of others. William decided to present Charlotte's ideas to Sir Edmund, not as demands from the royal family, but as proposals from the person most directly affected by the protocol dispute. If Sir Edmund's concerns were truly about security and appropriate boundaries rather than simple resistance to change, then Charlotte's suggested framework should address most of his objections. The meeting between William and Sir Edmund took place the following morning, with a very different dynamic than their previous confrontation. Instead of parents defending their child's friendship, this was a future king presenting a potential policy framework that had been developed by the person who would someday need to navigate similar situations throughout her royal career. Charlotte's proposals, as presented by William, were remarkably comprehensive for someone her age. She had suggested specific time periods for communications, particular locations where interactions could take place, approval processes for guards who might participate in such programs, and regular reviews to ensure that friendships remained within appropriate boundaries. Most importantly, Charlotte had proposed that any communication system should be voluntary for both guards and royal family members, ensuring that no one would be pressured to participate in relationships they weren't comfortable with. She had also suggested that such friendships should always be transparent to palace administration, eliminating any possibility of secret relationships that might compromise security. Sir Edmund found himself in the unexpected position of reviewing policy proposals from a 7-year-old that were more thoughtful and comprehensive than most administrative recommendations he received from experienced officials. Charlotte's framework addressed virtually every security concern he had raised while preserving the positive aspects of human connection that had made her friendship with Morrison so beneficial. The protocol chief requested time to review Charlotte's proposals in detail and to consult with security experts about their feasibility. He was beginning to recognize that his initial approach of simply prohibiting all informal communications might have been unnecessarily rigid, and that creative solutions could address his concerns without eliminating positive relationships entirely. 3 days later, Sir Edmund delivered his revised recommendations to palace administration. Rather than prohibiting communications between guards and royal family members, he proposed implementing Charlotte's framework as an official pilot program. The program would establish clear guidelines for appropriate relationships while allowing for the kind of meaningful human connections that Charlotte had demonstrated were possible within proper boundaries. The pilot program included several key elements that balanced security concerns with human needs. Participating guards would undergo additional background screening and specialized training about appropriate boundaries with royal family members. Communications would be limited to specific time periods and locations where they could be properly supervised. A formal approval process would ensure that all participants understood their responsibilities and limitations. Most importantly, the program recognized that human connection was not inherently dangerous to royal security. It was the absence of proper structure and oversight that created risks. By formalizing what Charlotte and Morrison had developed naturally, the palace could maintain security while acknowledging the value of meaningful relationships. William and Catherine were delighted by Sir Edmund's revised approach, recognizing that it represented exactly the kind of thoughtful compromise that would serve their children well throughout their royal careers. They particularly appreciated that the new framework would allow Charlotte to maintain her friendship with Morrison while establishing precedents that could benefit other royal family members in the future. Morrison learned about the pilot program's approval during a meeting with Colonel Hartwell, who expressed her admiration for how he had handled an unprecedented situation with dignity and professionalism. His relationship with Charlotte was officially recognized as the model for how guards and royal family members could interact appropriately, making him a pioneer in a new approach to royal protocol. The formal implementation of Charlotte's framework began the following Monday, with Morrison returning to duties that allowed for structured communications with the princess. Their first official interaction under the new guidelines was both similar to and different from their previous secret communications. The same warmth and mutual respect remained, but now their friendship operated within clear boundaries that everyone understood and supported. Charlotte's delight at Morrison's return was evident to everyone who observed their first sanctioned communication. Her enthusiastic wave and bright smile conveyed not just happiness at seeing her friend again, but pride in knowing that her ideas had helped solve a difficult problem that had troubled many adults. Dr. Westfield, who continued to monitor Charlotte's development under the new framework, noted that the princess had learned valuable lessons about problem-solving, compromise, and leadership during the crisis. Rather than simply accepting adult decisions about her friendship, Charlotte had actively participated in finding solutions that addressed everyone's concerns while preserving what was most important to her. The success of the pilot program began to attract attention from other royal households around the world, as palace administrators recognized that Charlotte's approach might offer solutions to similar challenges faced by royal families everywhere. The idea that formal protocol and human connection could coexist within proper frameworks was revolutionary in its simplicity and powerful in its implications. As autumn approached and Charlotte prepared to return to her regular academic schedule, her friendship with Morrison had evolved into something entirely new, an officially recognized relationship that served as proof that tradition and innovation could work together to create better outcomes for everyone involved. The secret language that had begun as a child's innocent attempt to connect with a lonely guard had become the foundation for a new approach to royal protocol, one that recognized the importance of human relationships while maintaining the security and dignity that royal service required. What started as Charlotte's personal experiment had become a model for the future of royal family interactions with the people dedicated to serving them. 1 year later, the impact of Princess Charlotte's secret signal system had rippled far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace, fundamentally changing how royal households around the world thought about the relationship between protocol and human connection. What had begun as a 7-year-old's innocent curiosity had evolved into a revolutionary approach to royal service that was being studied and implemented by monarchies across Europe and beyond. The pilot program that emerged from Charlotte's crisis with Sir Edmund Blackwood had exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only had it successfully maintained security while allowing meaningful relationships between guards and royal family members, but it had also produced measurable improvements in both guard performance and royal family well-being that surprised even the program's strongest supporters. Dr. Margaret Westfield's comprehensive evaluation of the program's first year revealed data that challenged decades of assumptions about royal protocol. Guards participating in the structured communication program showed significantly higher job satisfaction ratings than their colleagues in traditional positions. More importantly, their performance evaluations demonstrated increased alertness, better teamwork, and stronger commitment to their protective duties. The royal family members who participated in the program, particularly Charlotte herself, showed remarkable development in leadership skills, emotional intelligence, and understanding of their roles within the broader royal household. Charlotte's confidence in public appearances had grown noticeably, and her ability to connect with people from diverse backgrounds had impressed even veteran royal observers. Morrison, now recognized as the senior specialist in Guard Royal Communications, found himself in the unique position of training other guards in the delicate art of maintaining professional relationships while honoring appropriate boundaries. His experience with Charlotte had made him an expert in reading nonverbal cues, understanding individual communication styles, and providing emotional support without overstepping professional limits. The training program that Morrison helped develop became a model for royal security services worldwide. Guards learned not just about physical protection, but about the psychological and emotional aspects of serving royal families. They studied child development, communication theory, and cultural sensitivity, preparing them to be more than just physical barriers between royalty and potential threats. Charlotte, now 8 years old and significantly more mature than her years might suggest, had become an unofficial ambassador for the new approach to royal protocol. During a state visit to Denmark, she naturally engaged with the palace guards there using modified versions of the signal system she had developed with Morrison. The Danish royal family was so impressed by the positive interactions they witnessed that they requested detailed information about implementing similar programs in their own household. The ripple effect of Charlotte's innovation continued to spread through diplomatic channels. When the Swedish Crown Princess Victoria visited London and observed Charlotte's interactions with the palace guard, she immediately recognized the potential benefits for her own children. Within 6 months, The Swedish royal household had implemented their own version of Charlotte's communication framework, adapted to their cultural context and security requirements. Perhaps most significantly, Charlotte's approach had begun to influence how the British royal family thought about their relationships with all palace staff, not just guards. The success of structured communications with security personnel led to similar programs being developed for interactions with household staff, groundskeepers, and administrative personnel. The Princess of Wales became a particularly strong advocate for expanding Charlotte's model throughout the royal household. Catherine had observed firsthand how her daughter's natural empathy and curiosity had created positive changes for everyone involved, and she wanted to ensure that similar opportunities existed for George and Louis as they grew older. Prince George, initially more reserved than his sister, had gradually begun developing his own style of communication with palace staff under the structured program guidelines. His approach was more formal than Charlotte's, but equally genuine, focusing on expressing gratitude and recognition rather than the conversational friendship that characterized Charlotte's relationship with Morrison. Prince Louis, still young but already showing signs of his siblings' natural empathy, was beginning to participate in age-appropriate versions of the communication program. His interactions were simpler than Charlotte's complex signal system, but they demonstrated the same fundamental understanding that the people working around them were individuals worthy of respect and recognition. The academic community had also taken notice of Charlotte's innovation. Universities studying leadership development, child psychology, and organizational behavior began examining the palace communication program as a case study in how hierarchical institutions could maintain structure while fostering positive human relationships. Professor James Hamilton Clark of Oxford University's Leadership Studies program published a detailed analysis of how Charlotte's approach challenged traditional assumptions about authority and connection. His research suggested that organizations everywhere could learn from the princess's instinctive understanding that genuine leadership required authentic relationships with people at all levels of an institution. The international media, initially skeptical about reports of a young princess revolutionizing royal protocol, gradually recognized the significance of what Charlotte had accomplished. Feature articles appeared in prestigious publications worldwide, examining how her simple desire to connect with a palace guard had catalyzed changes that were influencing monarchy protocols across multiple continents. However, perhaps the most meaningful impact of Charlotte's innovation was the personal transformation it had created in the lives of individual people who worked within royal households. Guards, staff members, and administrators reported feeling more valued, more connected to their work, and more invested in the well-being of the families they served. Morrison himself had become something of a celebrity within palace circles, not because of his friendship with Charlotte, but because of how that friendship had evolved into a new model of professional service. His ability to provide emotional support and mentorship while maintaining perfect security protocols had made him a sought-after consultant for royal protection services worldwide. The sergeant's own daughter, Rebecca, had recovered fully from her appendicitis and had become fascinated by her father's unique role in royal service. She often asked him about Princess Charlotte, and Morrison would share age-appropriate stories about how one little girl's kindness had changed everything about how people thought about friendship and duty. Charlotte's relationship with Morrison continued to thrive under the formal framework they had helped create. Their daily communications had evolved into a sophisticated system that allowed for meaningful emotional support while respecting all security protocols. Morrison had become not just a friend, but a trusted mentor who helped Charlotte navigate the complexities of growing up in the public eye. As Charlotte prepared for her 9th birthday, she reflected on how much had changed since she first pressed her nose against the palace window and wondered about the motionless guards below. What had started as simple curiosity had grown into something that was affecting people she had never met in places she had never been. The birthday celebration itself demonstrated how much the royal household had changed. Rather than a purely family affair with minimal staff interaction, Charlotte's party included recognition of the palace workers who had become important parts of her daily life. Morrison was among the honored guests, representing not just his own friendship with Charlotte, but the broader community of people whose lives had been touched by her innovation. During the party, Charlotte gave a brief speech that surprised everyone with its maturity and insight. She spoke about learning that being a princess wasn't about being separate from others, but about finding ways to connect with people while respecting the important work they did. She thanked Morrison and the other guards not just for protecting her family, but for teaching her that friendship could exist anywhere if people were willing to be kind to each other. The speech was recorded and later shared widely as an example of how royal children were being prepared for leadership roles that emphasized service and connection rather than distance and authority. Charlotte's words resonated particularly strongly with young people around the world who saw in her approach a model for how privilege could be used to build bridges rather than walls. Looking toward the future, palace officials recognized that Charlotte's innovation had established precedents that would influence royal protocol for generations to come. The structured communication programs were being formalized into permanent policies that would outlast any individual relationships or personnel changes. Dr. Westfield's ongoing research suggested that children who grew up with opportunities for meaningful relationships across social and professional boundaries would become more effective leaders as adults. Charlotte's early experiences with Morrison and other palace staff were providing her with insights into human nature and organizational dynamics that no formal education could replicate. Sir Edmund Blackwood, the traditionalist who had initially opposed Charlotte's friendship with Morrison, had become one of the program's strongest supporters. His comprehensive review of the pilot program's outcomes had convinced him that thoughtful innovation could strengthen rather than weaken royal traditions. He now spoke regularly at international conferences about how institutions could evolve while maintaining their core values and purposes. The long-term implications of Charlotte's approach extended beyond royal households to influence thinking about leadership and human relationships in many contexts. Business schools began studying the palace communication program as an example of how leaders could maintain authority while fostering genuine connections with their teams. As this remarkable story entered its second year, Charlotte continued to spend time at her favorite window, still communicating with Morrison and other guards who had joined the structured program. But now she understood that their simple exchanges were part of something much larger, a new way of thinking about how people in positions of privilege and responsibility could use their positions to make life better for everyone around them. The secret signal that had once been shared only between a curious princess and a kind guard had become a symbol of hope for anyone who believed that human connection was more powerful than rigid protocol, that kindness was more important than tradition, and that sometimes the wisdom of children could teach adults how to build a better world. Morrison, watching Charlotte's continued growth and development, often reflected on how much they had both learned from their unlikely friendship. A young princess had taught him that his service meant more than following orders, while he had shown her that genuine leadership required caring about the individuals who made her privileged life possible. The legacy of Princess Charlotte's secret signal would endure long after she outgrew her daily communications with palace guards, inspiring future generations to find ways to connect across differences of rank, background, and circumstance. What had begun as one child's innocent curiosity had become proof that the most profound changes often start with the simplest acts of human kindness. In years to come, when Charlotte assumed greater royal responsibilities, she would carry with her the lessons learned from those early morning communications at her palace window. The understanding that true leadership meant seeing and valuing every person who contributed to a shared mission would guide her approach to royal service and influence how monarchy itself evolved to meet the needs of a changing world. The secret language of gestures and signals had become a universal vocabulary of respect, recognition, and human dignity, one that would continue to resonate wherever people sought to build bridges across the artificial boundaries that often separate us from one another.